Hi, good morning, everyone, and good afternoon and good evening to those who are not in the US. Hello and welcome, everyone, to the second day of the U.S. Saudi Arabia Business Leaders Forum, co hosted by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the Saudi Ministry of Investment. For those of you who may not know me, I'm Amir Sheikh, and I look after PepsiCo's business in Middle East, North Africa, and Pakistan. As chair of the Chamber's U.S. Saudi Arabia Business Program, PepsiCo is delighted to see this event move forward with such broad interest from the U.S. and Saudi business communities. It was wonderful to have His Excellency Khalid Al-Falih and the Chamber's new CEO, Suzanne Clark, kick off the forum yesterday, and to hear so many distinguished business leaders reflect on the future of the trade and investment relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia. I had the pleasure of meeting His Excellency in Riyadh earlier this year, and I'm confident that under his leadership and commitment, U.S.-Saudi economic relationships will continue to grow and prosper. This forum not only underscores the historic importance of our bilateral economic ties, it also points to the future and the potential for new partnerships and new opportunities that exist across the economy. We take pride in being an American company that has been operating in the kingdom for over 60 years. It is one of our top strategic markets, and we are deeply committed to working in, with, and for the Saudi people, as well as helping ensure the success of the Kingdom's Vision 2030 agenda. Turning back to today's program, I would now like to provide a brief overview of what you can expect. First, we're delighted to welcome Her Royal Highness Princess Reema bint Bandar Al Saud, Ambassador of Saudi Arabia to the US, who will provide today's keynote remarks. Following her remarks, we'll move to a panel discussion on economic diversification and how Vision 2030 has fueled investment opportunities in the kingdom. We will then hear a series of conversations, first on the future of mobility and transportation, and then on sustainability and the circular economy. Finally, we'll close with the forum with a panel discussion on healthcare innovation and biotech, which will discuss the role the sector is playing in economic recovery and improving quality of life following the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm now honored to introduce Her Royal Highness Princess Reema. She is no stranger to many of you nor Washington. We were first introduced to Her Royal Highness when she was heading the Saudi Sports for All Federation, where she had a pivotal role in getting hundreds of Saudis to join the SFA's drive for physical fitness. Throughout her career, Her Royal Highness has long been a key and inspirational driver for social issues, with a strong focus on advocating for women empowerment. Her Royal Highness has served as a member of the World Bank's Advisory Council for the Women Entrepreneurs Finance Initiatives since 2017 and is a founding member of Zara Breast Cancer Association in Riyadh. More recently, Princess Reema has been elected as a member of the International Olympic Committee. We were so fortunate to have her as the Kingdom's ambassador to the US and see the incredible work she is doing in driving this important relationship. She's a strong and passionate advocate for American companies in the Kingdom, and we look forward to hearing her thoughts on what the future holds for our economic relationship. Your Royal Highness, I turn it over to you. Thank you.
I want to thank Amir for his very kind introduction, and Pepsi for its leadership of the Chamber's Saudi program, its support of this important forum, and its valued long-term commitment and investments in the Kingdom. I also want to thank the U.S. Chambers of Commerce and Saudi Arabia's Ministry of Investment for organizing this two-day conference, bringing together business leaders from both nations to consider our shared economic future and how we can emerge stronger together. And a special recognition to the Chamber's new CEO, Suzanne Clark, the first woman to lead this historic institution. We've had a close and constructive relationship with the Chamber, and I look forward to this continuing with Suzanne and her team. After more than a year of shutdowns and lockdowns, school closings, travel restrictions, and many businesses being shuttered, our mutual efforts have now put us on a path to recovery, to reopening, to returning not to business as usual, but to a new post-pandemic usual, that if we work together can be improved and better. But what does emerging together stronger mean? There's talk about a reset, but when it comes to the Kingdom, I'm not sure it's as much a reset as a restart. Next month will mark 5 years from when Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman unveiled Vision 2030, a bold plan to restructure Saudi Arabia's economy, diversifying from oil dependence, embracing technology and sustainable development. A plan to introduce groundbreaking and social cultural reforms, giving everyone a stake in the kingdom's future, ensuring that every citizen, young or old, man or woman, has a place and pathway to realizing their ambitions and goals. Little did we know then, but Vision 2030 would be instrumental in enabling Saudi Arabia to withstand this crisis. It would become the platform toward our quick and healthy recovery. And in many ways, Vision 2030 prepared Saudi Arabia for this past year. It enabled us to become resilient and resistant and keep us on a track for our resurgence. Because Vision 2030 was our reset. And it enabled us not to shut down over the past year. And now, while we look to restart, building on Vision 2030's plans for economic diversification and development, Vision 2030 was mostly unaffected by COVID's long reach, but not completely. Nothing and no one will ever escape COVID unimpacted. There's going to be a form of PTSD that lingers. Yes, we'll escape the pandemic. Yes, we'll build and recover. But we need to learn from this experience, and we need to better prepare. We need to look for the lessons, and we have so much to learn. Just a couple of weeks ago, we celebrated International Women's Day. One important lesson as we chart our path towards emerging stronger is how do we make sure the recovery includes everyone, especially those most impacted by the pandemic, especially women. To emerge stronger, we need to acknowledge that COVID's impact has not been gender neutral. Women have disproportionately suffered from this pandemic. More women than men have been pushed into poverty, exploding the gender poverty gap. More women have lost their jobs than men, and more young women have been forced to leave school than men, an estimated 11 million more young women worldwide. And more women are burdened with the emotional toll of this crisis, as globally more than 70% of healthcare providers and first responders are women. If we are to emerge stronger and emerge healthier, emerge with futures equally as bright for everyone, we must have a shared commitment to make that happen. But our recovery will be unequal and ultimately short-lived. The kingdom's ready to make sure our recovery is shared by everyone. Vision 2030 is not only a program to diversify and strengthen the nation's economy, it's a program to empower women, a program to make gender equality, diversity, and inclusion a driving force in the kingdom's plans for the future. Everybody's seen the stories about women driving in Saudi, and while that is important, that's barely scratching the surface of what's happening today in the kingdom. Our reforms are much more extensive and impactful, changing the lives of not only women, but families across the kingdom. More women attend college in Saudi Arabia than men. More women are awarded advanced degrees. And women in Saudi Arabia today enjoy equal pay, something that women across the West don't yet. And that's the story of the new Saudi Arabia, our story of reform and gender equality. And that's why 2030, our vision, will enable us to respond to the needs of women and make sure COVID's disproportionate impact on women does not become a permanent impairment. That's one essential consideration to emerging stronger. Another is taking a moment to consider the world we want and then putting a strategy in place to build that world. And that's what Saudi's been doing. When a nation known for oil production and distribution announces plans to diversify, that's a big deal. It's a demonstration of our national commitment to building a more sustainable world. Climate change is real, and we need to take it seriously. Sustainability is not just something that's fashionable. It's essential, and it needs to inform our economic and business decisions. And if we embrace this new paradigm, it comes with opportunities. Saudi Arabia is committed to reducing its reliance on oil production, to becoming a world leader in green, clean energy production, to positively contribute to the global battle against climate change. And we're not just planning to make this happen sometime in the future. We're doing it now. We're confident that our commitment to renewable, sustainable energy will serve as an economic driver and give Saudi Arabia a competitive edge in the future. It's a chance for us to be an innovation leader. It's a way for us to collaborate with the global community and address the climate crisis. And the kingdom is already leading the way. We have a goal to produce 50% of our electricity from renewable sources by 2030, a plan that will create more than 750,000 jobs in our clean energy sector by the end of the decade. By 2030, we plan on adding 60 gigawatts of clean energy capacity, a combination of wind, solar photovoltaic, and concentrated solar power. Our goal to produce 50% of our electricity from renewable sources by 2030. We've announced a $28 billion Saudi Industrial Development Fund to invest in clean and renewable energy projects and the manufacturing of renewable energy components. Our solar farms are set to produce electricity at the lowest cost per kilowatt in the world. And we're investing in green hydrogen. We have plans to build a $5 billion green hydrogen plant. Green hydrogen can run the world's clean buses and truck fleets. This facility will produce enough green hydrogen daily to run 20,000 hydrogen-fueled buses. That's how we see a future where we all emerge stronger and healthier, how we can work together to build a sustainable, prosperous future. And a part of that future involves the kingdom opening up, encouraging tourism, and welcoming the world to come and experience Saudi hospitality, culture, and heritage. We plan on investing more than $800 billion in tourism-related projects over the next 10 years. We want to attract more than 100 million tourists a year by 2030, and we aim for tourism to make up as much as 10% of our GDP by 2030. We've introduced for the first time tourism visas, unfortunately just before the pandemic, but these visas are in place and ready for when the world is ready to reopen, and the kingdom's ready too. And when we do reopen, the world will find a Saudi Arabia that's moving forward with some of the world's largest, most significant development projects. Qiddiya, which is an enormous entertainment city outside of Riyadh. It broke ground 2 years ago, and even through the pandemic, work has continued. The Red Sea Project, an eco-friendly, conservation-centered luxury resort that will redefine how we see the intersection of travel and nature. And NEOM, the $500 billion city of the future, which will bring together technology and sustainable development, the world's most ambitious project, and a new global crossroads. And this is how we will emerge stronger. How we come out of this pandemic better using this moment, as an opportunity to improve, a moment to address the issues and concerns that will determine the future and shape the world we pass on to our children and their children. Equality and diversity, sustainability and climate awareness, and inclusion. Inclusion has never been more important than it is today. It'll be the key to emerging stronger from this pandemic, because to emerge stronger, we must emerge together. And there is a light at the end of this tunnel, but we need to make sure that that shines bright for everyone. And if ever there was a crisis where we're in this together, it's this one. It's not just good enough to vaccinate some while others remain unprotected and at risk. That risk is to all of us, the variants, the mutations. The only way to get ahead of this is to protect everyone. And this past year, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was president of the G20. And at the first ever virtual session of the G20 leaders, Saudi King Salman opened that unprecedented session, encouraging his fellow G20 leaders to extend a helping hand to developing countries and to the least developed nations to enable them to build their capacities and to overcome this crisis. He was talking about the nations that were not at the meeting, the nations all too often underrepresented. And to emerge stronger, we must all emerge together. I thank you for the opportunity to join you today. And I now want to turn things over to Steve Lutz, the Vice President of the Middle East Affairs Department at the U.S. Chamber, who will be moderating today's first panels. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and we are all in this together. Please know that we really do appreciate your leadership and your active support of a dynamic and growing bilateral commercial relationship. So we're grateful for all that you and your team are doing. Ambassador, that was a very compelling message of key considerations for us to consider and look at as we emerge from this pandemic, like ensuring that the recovery includes everyone, particularly those who have been disproportionately affected, like women, and perhaps most important, as you pointed out, to ensure that this gap doesn't become permanent. Also, using this moment in time to consider the future that we want and choosing to tackle those issues that have broad implications like climate change. The ambassador, of course, spoke of Saudi's commitment to a sustainable future. And as we heard yesterday, and I'm confident that we'll hear more about today, there's already robust cooperation and a pipeline of projects between the kingdom and American companies on energy transition, clean energy, and the circular economy. And as the ambassador outlined, the story of the new Saudi Arabia is one of investment that leans into an array of knowledge-based sectors that harness technology and innovation. It's a future of a country that will become more competitive by embracing a reform agenda and allowing all of its citizens to pursue their dreams and aspirations. Like the Ministry of Investment, the ambassador and her team at the embassy are partners in a range of activities and discussions that continue to evolve around efforts to bring more ventures, more cooperation, more investment into an increasingly diverse range of industries. And that really sets us up well for our first panel today. And I'm really excited about this panel, Economic Diversification, Vision 2030, Fueling Investment Opportunities in the Kingdom. I'm excited about both the topic, but even more so the three panelists who are joining. It's really an all-star lineup. And let me say that each panelist in his and her own right have a remarkable resume and impressive experiences. But to ensure that we use our time wisely, I'm going to keep my introductions brief. So first, we'll be joined by Ed Knight, Vice Chairman of NASDAQ. And as the Vice Chairman, Ed manages global government relations and serves as a Senior Public Policy Advisor on public policy and litigation. Ed has also served previously as NASDAQ's General Counsel and as General Counsel of the U.S. Department of Treasury. Next, we have His Excellency Nabil Alamoudi, President of the Oleon Financing Company, which is responsible for the Oleon Group's businesses and finances in the MENA region, India and Turkey. And prior to his current role, he was the Minister of Transport in the Kingdom. Rounding out the panel, we're very delighted to have with us today and be joined by Sarah Al-Shawami, Chairperson of the Board of Directors of Tadawul, Saudi Arabia's stock exchange. She is the first woman to chair the exchange, and I should also add that she is the CEO of NCB Capital. So as I mentioned, really an all-star lineup, and we really thank you each for being with us today to kick off day two of our U.S. Saudi Business Leaders Forum. So I'd like to open it up and share or offer each of you kind of a question to kind of get us going that's broad-reaching. But if you could share with our listeners about your companies, or in the case the exchange's focus in the kingdom, and how you're helping to drive economic diversification. And if we'll go just in the order that I did introductions for simplicity, so we'll start with you, Ed, then go to Nabil, then Sarah, please.
Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. We are always excited about talking about the kingdom and our work there. NASDAQ has a 20-year relationship plus with Tadawul. We're very proud of our work there and being a partner with them as they embark on Vision 2030 and the diversification of their economy. Let me answer that question by focusing on something that we have done well in the United States over many decades, and that Saudi Arabia is very focused on, and that is creating an ecosystem that will drive early stage, high growth companies and growth in their economy and diversification in their economy. That ecosystem doesn't happen overnight. It's taken us many years. But because of it, since the beginning of this year, we've had 258 IPOs in the United States, 243 of them on NASDAQ, and we're very proud of that. In Europe, there have only been 44. Why the difference? It's because we pulled together in the United States many different threads. The law, research, academics, an entrepreneurial culture, all those different elements come together, and a very strong capital market. Tadawul is very focused on creating that also. They have embarked on bringing their market to meet and exceed global standards for trading. We have worked closely with them in putting in new trading systems, risk management systems, post-trade systems, and diversifying their product base to facilitate more capital formation. One thing I want to emphasize that they have done very well is their regulatory program and the Capital Markets Authority, which we've worked closely with. They are world-class in their regulation. Their investors can have confidence in that regulation. We're proud they use some of our technology in surveilling their markets. But Saudi Arabia and Tata will understand very well how to create the conditions to diversify an economy, how to drive the capital markets to provide that liquidity that entrepreneurs need, how to create that ecosystem.
Well, thank you, Ed. A lot of things we can pick up on there, but I think it's fascinating to hear about the work that's being done with SMEs. And then, as you mentioned, the importance of the regulatory environment and alignment kind of with international best practices when it comes to those capital markets. Nabil, if we could come to you, love to hear about the Oleon Financing Company and your vision and how you're helping to drive this diversification.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you everyone for joining this panel. It's really an honor to be here and a real pleasure for me to be seeing people and friends from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce again. And the Oleon Group has been around for now. Next year will be our 75th year in existence, and that's a milestone in itself. So I think the question started about how do we look to diversify and help diversify the kingdom's economy. I think the history of Oleon was about building the Saudi economy as well. And with many partnerships, successful partnerships, frankly, with U.S. companies such as Kimberly-Clark, Coca-Cola, and even Bechtel, who we heard from yesterday as well. So the Oleon Group is an extremely diversified group in itself. We have significant real estate holdings, significant player in the public equities market in the kingdom and in the region, which is under my responsibility, and a private equity play. In terms of our operating companies, we have almost 25 to 26 operating companies within the kingdom and the region that go from an F&B, energy sector, health and personal care, and ICT, and finally on food and beverages, what I mentioned the last one. So that gives us kind of an overview of what the company and the group has stood for over the last 75 years. But we're very excited about the next 75 years. And the company is being driven right now by a sustainability program. And we heard that from Princess Reema earlier today, or just a few moments ago. And we're going to be one of the first private companies, privately held companies, to bring out a sustainability report for all the operating companies in which we own. And that, I think, shows kind of the breadth of what we've done and the breadth and kind of where we're going in the future. So we're focusing on renewables as well, looking forward. We also have, I should mention, a very large shareholding in the Saudi British Bank, which recently merged with Bank Al Awad and has formed the third largest bank in the kingdom. So we're also getting involved in the fintech sector as well. So we're very excited about the next 75 years of the kingdom's success. We view our success as part of the kingdom's success, and we're excited to drive the diversification of the kingdom's economy moving forward in a variety of various sectors, which we can maybe talk about in the next few minutes.
Nabil, that's fascinating. My big takeaway is that the DNA of the Oleon Group is diversification, and it started that way, and it's only growing. So that's very interesting to hear. And I think we want to pick up more on the reporting that you mentioned as well. That's fascinating on sustainability. Sarah, coming to you next. Would love, from your perch there as the chair of the exchange, would love to hear how you envision the focus on driving diversification.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be speaking again at this conference and updating the audience about all the developments that we've went through in the kingdom. Building on what Her Royal Highness Princess Reema has mentioned before, Vision 2030, Tadawul is a huge part and a big player in Vision 2030 through the Financial Sector Development Program, building healthy capital markets and sustaining all the developments that we have been doing is an important milestone to encourage investing in Saudi Arabia and making our global destination for investment. Tadawul went through huge technological development. As the vice chair of NASDAQ had just mentioned, they are partners with us. During the last 4 to 5 years, we have changed our whole trading platform, created our depository center. Now also recently last year, we've launched officially our Maqasa, our clearinghouse. We've worked very closely with the CMA to work on updating our regulations to protect investors and make it easier for issuers as well. All this have paid well for us. We have also one of the most important KPIs that we had as Tadawul as part of Vision 2030 is actually opening up the markets for foreign investors. As many of you know, back just in 2015, we had zero foreign investment in Saudi Arabia, and we have started slowly, but since 2017, we have actually accelerated this, and we've been very successful in making Tadawul part of all major indices in the world. We have always been the largest market in the region. However, we are now one of the top 10 largest markets in the world, and we are the third largest market in emerging markets. And this all was a result of the clear plan that we had as part of the financial sector development program, which is one of the programs of Vision 2030. The recent years, and touching on what Princess Reema has mentioned regarding the challenges we faced last year, we all know that 2020 was a very unique year. We have been tested at Tadawul. We have managed to actually keep our operation at even better levels than any year. Also, with the increase in daily trading volume by more than 200%, and still it's going strong right now. We have managed to keep our IPOs also flowing last year, and I think our colleagues in Tadawul did a very good job. The number of QFIs actually continued on growing. We now stand at 2,400 registered QFIs investing in the kingdom. That's an increase year on year from March last year to now by more than 17%. So we are right now pleased with all the achievements that we have made. We are happy we kept many of our promises, and we're actually showing results. And one of the main things that we are doing is we are continuing our efforts in further developing our market and actually offering more for investors and issuers going forward. And maybe we can talk about this later today. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah. It's great to hear, and it's encouraging to hear how you actually are coming through the pandemic in an even stronger position. So kudos to you for the leadership, and to Saudi and all of your stakeholders, for pulling together like that. Ed, I'd like to come back to you, and Nabil started to allude to this, and would love to pick up on this with you. ESG, environmental, social, and governance reporting, I know is a topic that has moved to the forefront in the United States and in Europe, and more investors are certainly interested in ESG data as a factor when they're choosing where to invest. So would love to get your thoughts on the standardization of ESG reporting as a factor to attracting more investment into the kingdom. And of course, Nabil, Sarah, feel free to jump in on this as well. But Ed, if you can start us off, that would be wonderful.
Well, the ESG standard issue is a global phenomenon, and it is a grassroots phenomenon. It's coming from investors, also from governments and institutions, and employees. But this is truly a grassroots phenomenon from the bottom up, and the whole world has to deal with it. From the point of view of the kingdom, they were on top of this and understood it. And incorporated in Vision 2030 years ago. And I think that is critical. There is a struggle worldwide to come up with global standards that everyone can accept. But I'm confident that the Kingdom will be a leader in that regard because they've gotten a head start on this in their planning in Vision 2030. I will note, for instance, in the case of Tadawul, they were the first Saudi company to sign up to the UN Women's Empowerment Principles. They have embraced the ESG issue. I'm sure Sarah can tell you more about what they're doing in that regard, but the fact that 380 foreign financial institutions who are all under this pressure around ESG registered in the Qualified Foreign Institutional Investor Program in 2020, despite the pandemic and so many other factors, I think shows you that there is global interest in investing in the Kingdom and that they are in line with international standards in many areas, including regulation, but also moving in the right direction in terms of ESG and a recognition of the importance of that to global financial markets.
Well, thank you for that context and then bringing it down to the Kingdom. And Sarah and Nabil would love to give you an opportunity if either of you wanted to add on to that on this topic of the ESG reporting.
Sure. I guess I'll go just in the order. The Al Ayyan Group sits on the IBC committee in the World Economic Forum, and so we've been heavily involved in the ESG or in the stakeholder capitalism or whatever moniker we want to ascribe to it, but I think they all have the same intentions. And we started on this path as a group 3 years ago on the operating company levels, especially on the E side of the ESG, and getting that data set going was kind of the first set of challenges that we faced. But now that we've done that, we're now moving on to the other elements of the ESG spectrum. The group has for some time, and this is no secret to anyone listening, obviously been chaired by Mrs. Lubna Al Ayyan, and therefore the diversity element has always been very strong, and especially women's empowerment within the group for the last 30 or 40 years, and that's only getting stronger. We've had the Al Ayyan Women Network going on for 10 years, and we see more, and there's actually, I think Sarah talked about KPIs. One of our KPIs as management is empowering more women into management positions within the Al Ayyan Group and the operating companies in which it owns. I think the standardization is an issue. I am honored to be on multiple boards, and they all are now talking about ESG. So kind of the grassroots discussion that Ed mentioned is really beginning to seep up into the board discussions. And very diverse companies from Aramco to private healthcare to the Al Ayyan Group. So it's now become part of needs to become more of the DNA of a company. And I agree with what Ed said. We're hearing employees and millennials asking the same thing from management and shareholders is, what are you doing on the ESG question? So I think what's happening globally is happening locally. And we're going to be in the forefront, as Her Royal Highness mentioned, about renewables and sustainability as part of Vision 2030, which we talked about, which was issued in 2016. And we're moving down that path as a nation and as the Al Ayyan Group as well. So I think I don't think it's the future anymore. I think it's kind of the present as it's kind of here with us now.
Yeah. That's so true, Nabil. And Sarah would love to give you an opportunity if you wanted to share some thoughts on this topic.
Yes, sure. And picking up of what His Excellency mentioned when he says it is here now, Tadawul right now is actually working on our own ESG disclosure guidelines for listed companies in Saudi. And this work started back in 2019. We have realized at the time, after joining the indices and speaking ourselves to many asset managers around the world, and many other stakeholders, that this was an emerging topic. It was, of course, and still is very strong demand in worldwide, but in the region, it is something that is fairly newly introduced. However, for Tadawul, it isn't. And now we have reached the stage where our guidelines are almost ready. We are going to work with the listed companies on the approach of adapting those guidelines. We will start gradually. We will start by educating them, educating all the different stakeholders until we actually reach to the point where everybody is applying those standards, but they are about to be issued. As many of you mentioned before, Tadawul has been very active in this field regarding the G and the governance. CMA, which is our Capital Market Authority, along with Tadawul and many other government institutions, have worked on this element. We adopted the new companies law a few years back. Our governance regulations as well were updated and imposed a few years back by the regulator, and we believe that this have made the position of our listed companies in a much better place to be, a safe destination for investors all over the world. In regards to the S socially, of course, the kingdom has made strides there, improving many social aspects. Women is one of them, and as Ed mentioned, yes, we have been actually part of the UN Women Sustainability for the last 3 years, and we're working actively with that. As a company as well, I think the first chairperson in Saudi Arabia, chairwoman in Saudi Arabia, was myself back in 2017. Today we have, I think, 20 or 30% of our management are women, and almost the same percentage of Tadawul and its subsidiaries colleagues are women. What we focus on is to actually give equal opportunity for anyone, whether man or woman. We do believe with empowerment, and we believe with merit as well. And I think that is the more sustainable approach towards this. We acknowledge that we need to make more effort as well, and we are on the path to that.
Sarah, thank you so much, and really interesting perspectives. And as you mentioned, that kind of equality of opportunity is key. So we'll come back to you on that. Ed, I wanted to pick up on something you talked about in your opening response. This idea, this entrepreneurial center that you've done out in San Francisco, and as you look at that and the importance of SMEs to diversification, how could a facility like that assist with fostering a greater entrepreneurial ecosystem and increasing the number of startups and SMEs in the kingdom? How would you envision that?
Well, since we started the Entrepreneurial Center through our foundation about 5 years ago, we've served over 25,000 entrepreneurs who have visited it, either in person or virtually, to participate in programs. So we have mentorship programs there. We have what I would call global programs, where entrepreneurs from outside the United States meet with Silicon Valley entrepreneurs. The kingdom has been part of exchanges like that. We have had educational programs, public funding 101 for free, where entrepreneurs can learn more about how to raise money from the capital markets. As I alluded to earlier, the successful capital markets in terms of fostering early stage companies that are so critical to job growth and diversification and innovation and moving our economies forward require many disciplines coming together. And we try to bring those disciplines together at the Entrepreneurial Center to further education as to what constitutes best practices in a market and in a culture in a society that fosters entrepreneurship. So this is an idea that we think makes sense and gets at the heart of when people come to us and say, NASDAQ, you must have something magic that happens. It's not magic. It is hard work, and it's a lot of different disciplines getting them correct at the same time and having that collaboration across disciplines.
Well, that's really interesting, and you're right. It's pulling all that together. I know it's an overused phrase, but into a kind of a one-stop shop. But NASDAQ does have that broad knowledge and expertise to bring to bear. So
I would add, there is an element of excitement and that is associated with that. And when people ask me about the kingdom, I tell them, go there. All right, see it for yourself. It's hard to read and understand it, but we see today with Sarah, with the ambassador, how many exciting visionary leaders they have, and that it is a very special place where a lot of exciting things are happening, including at the entrepreneurial level.
That's fascinating. Well, we'll stay tuned and look to have you back in some form to hear updates on the progress with this entrepreneurial center and effort. Nabil, if I can jump to you, given your range of kind of public and private sector experiences, would love to hear your thoughts on both some of the strengths that are emerging in non-oil sectors, but also would like to hear if you see areas for improvement in terms of this, kind of journey on diversification.
Yeah, it's a great question. We're certainly seeing new sectors that are emerging that are interesting, that were not really at the forefront of the development of the kingdom earlier on. And we've heard some of that already in terms of tourism from Her Royal Highness, entertainment, and I think she mentioned as well logistics. And logistics, from my previous role, is really a focus of the kingdom moving forward to try and take advantage of its geographical location in between Asia and Europe and Africa. And given its inherent and very solid infrastructure that it has, and now the digitization of the import-export process. So the kingdom has a lot to develop in that sector, and we're looking into that sector as well, and how to play in it, and how to be smart in where you play in that sector. Fintech is also emerging, but given that Sarah's here, I think she's much more able to talk about that sector, but that's also a sector that we're looking at and has a lot of excitement and entrepreneurship behind it that you and Ed were just talking about moments ago. I mean, I'm not sure I can say there are things that can be improved. I think the one thing that I agree 100% with Ed is you need to come here to know how quickly things are changing. And from a private sector perspective, and kind of forgetting my public sector hat previously, the rapidity of the change has meant that the private sector cannot even almost keep up with the public sector changes, and be it regulations, and most of them are all positive, but it does take time to adjust to the new reality of how the kingdom is operating. But it's ultimately better for everyone, and it's going to create a much more competitive private sector that contributes more to the economic growth of the kingdom. And we're certainly part of that success story here at the Al Group, and we're excited to kind of move along with the changes and change ourselves at the same time. So this is now, we have self-imposed change, and now we have external things changing us rapidly as well. And we know we can adjust to things moving forward. So I think one of the things that is just disconcerting, not disconcerting, I would say, but that does take some adjusting to, is how frequently things are changing and how quickly. And that does take time to adjust from the private sector perspective.
Nabil, that's very interesting, and it's an interesting dynamic when the government's ahead of the curve and the private sector's chasing behind. So thank you for all those insights. Sir, we'll come to you kind of with our final question here, and you've already touched on to some degree the role that women are increasingly playing, and we know that having more women in the workforce in and of itself leads to greater economic diversification. But beyond at Tadawul, I would love to hear the enhancements that you're witnessing with the Saudi government, that they're facilitating to create more opportunities for women in business.
Thank you very much. I think right now it's no secret of the major reforms that have happened in the last 5 years in Saudi Arabia. I think today we, as Ed mentioned, just come to Saudi Arabia and you actually see reality. I always used to say we existed. I have been working in the financial services sector since 2001. So, and I had my whole training here in Saudi Arabia, and I'm a 100% Saudi product and empowered by Saudi men. And like me, there are many others and many other women. I think the difference is that education and equal opportunity. And I think going forward, this is what we need to focus on in the financial sector. Today, there are many discussions about women in boards. A few years back, you would not see any woman in any listed company board in Saudi Arabia. Today, we have a number that is for now and for the beginning is I consider an achievement. However, is it enough? Of course not. Why we don't have enough? It's because you will need from any man or woman the relevant experience to play their role, whether in higher management or in boards. What I can assure you today, I think we're having equal opportunity. I think companies realize that if they actually empower women, not just their own financial results will actually improve, and this is a proven thing, and maybe some other time we can share some data, but they would be actually complying with one of the main components of Vision 2030. In Saudi Arabia, the changes and empowerment socially in the last 5 years are very visible. We all can feel them. We've heard Her Royal Highness Princess Reema mentioned some of them. I might not be the best person to demonstrate this whole thing, but just living in Saudi and the quality of life in Saudi has changed. I think the level of ambition of young people has changed. We were just talking about speed, and I think we have proven as Saudi citizens and Saudi nations that we are very agile and we react quickly. In technology, for example, we are very proud to have one of the most technological advanced financial system in the world. Banking services in Saudi Arabia is very well advanced, and I think one of the top in the world. You can basically do everything online, and you don't even need to visit any branch. That goes for individuals and as well as for companies. And just talking about fintech, part of the financial sector development program is Saudi Fintech, and it is a program. It is an initiative that is now actually going, and they have, I think, almost 50 partners and have supported many of the new fintech companies that is under the Central Bank of Saudi Arabia. And we can see that many of the financial institutions in Saudi Arabia are actually putting funding and money into the technological advancements going forward. We hear a lot about creating new digital banks in Saudi Arabia, and I think in a year or two, you're going to see also further change. And as Nabil said, we just need to keep up, and I think we're good at that.
Steve, maybe if you allow me just to build on Sarah's comment, maybe on bricks and mortars business, which Alayan has, which is Burger King. 30% of the workers within Burger Kings are women, are Saudi women. We have restaurant managers now who are the Saudi women running the show, and we're hoping to have by the end of this year a restaurant fully staffed and fully run by Saudi women.
Wonderful. Well, I got to say, love the insights on that, and we could easily spend the rest of today's forum talking about this and more. But unfortunately, we are running out of time, and I want to thank all of you, Ed, Nabil, Sarah, for spending some time with us this morning and sharing your perspectives. We certainly, and I certainly look forward to getting back to the kingdom in person, and as we work through this pandemic and travel becomes more possible and more frequent again. And I would say, one of my takeaways from this conversation is one of my favorite U.S. sitcoms is Modern Family, and it has a character, Jay Pritchett, and his kind of tagline is "Let's go, let's go, let's go." And in my mind, that's very much embodies kind of Vision 2030 and the rapid pace of reform that Saudi's pursuing, particularly toward diversification. So let's go, let's go, let's go. Thank you all for being with us today, and we look forward to staying in touch and having a follow-up conversation with all of you. So Ed, Nabil, Sarah, thank you so much, and we'll stay in touch and hope you enjoy the rest of today's program.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Nabil. It was a pleasure.
Yeah,
thank you, Steve.
well done. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests and friends, both in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the USA, thank you for the opportunity to be with you today, at least virtually. My name is Tom Earle, Chief Commercial Officer of Venture Global LNG. It is our genuine honour to be a proud sponsor of today's event. I'd like to firstly thank the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the Saudi Ministry of Investment for hosting this important forum, which comes at a very consequential time. Saudi Arabia and the United States have enjoyed a strong alliance for decades, and that partnership will be important now more than ever as the world economy recovers from the massive impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. A pillar to the success of that partnership and recovery is energy. As the world's two major producers and suppliers of hydrocarbons, the United States and Saudi Arabia have a joint responsibility to utilize and deploy our abundant resources to support the security of our own nations and the rest of the world. In order to meet the growing demand for electricity, power the global economy, and reduce emissions, the world needs more clean, affordable LNG. Venture Global will soon inaugurate America's next LNG export facility, building on the historic success of the first wave of American LNG exports, which began only 5 short years ago. We are achieving dramatic cost reductions through innovation, and we are able to pass those low costs on to our customers. Our strategy to offer low-cost destination-free LNG to consuming nations supports the phase-out and closure of coal and lignite-fired generation, as well as the build-out of renewable generation. Our friends in Saudi Arabia share these same goals for gas and renewables, having set the ambitious, admirable and achievable target of a 50-50 gas and renewable energy mix by 2030. Venture Global America's next exporter stands ready to supply our friends and allies like Saudi Arabia with low-cost and abundant flexible American LNG. This will fuel cleaner electricity to millions of people whilst having a strong and fast impact on the global climate. We look forward to working with our friends in the Kingdom and the United States on these important energy and LNG topics for decades to come. Thank you. It has been a genuine pleasure to be with you all today.
That was a great discussion on economic diversification in the Kingdom, and it really leads well into our next speaker, Andrew McDonald, Senior Vice President of Mobility and Business Operations at Uber, an innovative company whose fundamental business breeds diversification into economies around the globe, including Saudi Arabia. In his leadership role at Uber, Andrew is responsible for the company's global ride-sharing operations and mobility businesses, including public transit, partnerships, and micro-mobility. Uber is really a continuation of Andrew's startup ambitions. Andrew, I understand you founded 2 startups in the years before your time at Uber. And prior to that, in terms of your entrepreneurial pursuits, you were a management consultant with Bain & Company. So Andrew, thank you for being with us today. We're honored to have you with us. And our discussion here is essentially akin to kind of a speed round interview, if you will. So I'd like to jump right into it. And Andrew, to start off with, if you could please tell us about Uber's work and investments in the Kingdom, And what has been your biggest accomplishment in Saudi Arabia?
Well, thank you for having me, Steve. I'm very excited to be here. Saudi Arabia is a very important market for us, and I would like to extend thanks from Uber to His Excellency Khalid Al-Falih, Minister of Investment, for being a strong supporter of ours and advocating for an environment that allows us to grow our presence in the country. In terms of our biggest accomplishment in the kingdom, our goal overall, when I think about our global business, is to serve as many people as possible. And Saudi's been a really strong market for us in terms of trying to accomplish that. As I think about the past few years, I'd probably highlight two areas of significant investment and initiatives on our part. One is today, 100% of drivers using Uber in the kingdom are Saudi nationals. Only a few years ago, that percentage was in the single digits. As you can imagine, this was a pretty major undertaking for us and not without its challenges, especially given that moving from single digits to 100% meant a very large reduction in the total number of drivers available to operate on the platform. We believe really strongly in our investments in the kingdom and want to see the whole industry meet those same targets. Secondly, I'd call out Masaruki, a long-term program we created that brought together a number of initiatives focusing on women's mobility, both riders and drivers. This included a strategic partnership with Takamul Holding, which operates Wusol, which is a program developed by the Human Resources Development Fund to help women get to and from the workplace through affordable subsidized transportation, making both transport and work more accessible for women across the country. As part of Masaruki, we also introduced a women preferred view, which is a feature to give women drivers in Saudi Arabia the choice to select preference for women riders. And this was actually a global first for Uber. We initially created it for Saudi in light of the major transformation and to create women's access to flexible part-time economic opportunities. But this is something we're actually looking to move to more markets. So this is an example of us innovating in Saudi for the benefit of the world.
Well, Andrew, that's really impressive. First, getting to that 100%, that is a very impressive accomplishment. And then certainly tailoring, those first in the globe programs, to have that kind of inclusive economic growth and bringing women along in Saudi's future is absolutely paramount. So kudos to Uber on that. Next question I'd like to throw to you is, as we come through the pandemic around the globe, how has Uber's approach to mobility evolved, and what will that mean in Saudi Arabia for your business?
So through the pandemic, Uber's been very focused on leading our industry. We're a mobility business, and when the world stops moving, that's really, really challenging. And so we've really tried to lead with community first, community focused initiatives, supporting people that earn money on the platform, and leading with new safety technologies and new products to try to mitigate the impact that communities are feeling. We've done this by working closely with both the public and private sector partners, and really to through the pandemic to get through and help those who need to move, and now more recently help economies get back to business. In Saudi, this included launching Uber Medics, which provided rides for healthcare workers in Riyadh, Jeddah, and the Eastern province with discounted trips to and from their workplaces. We also have rolled out safety measures for this new normal. So in places where face coverings are mandatory, like in Saudi Arabia, drivers can cancel the ride, or riders can cancel the ride if the other party isn't wearing a mask. We've also secured a partnership with Unilever to equip drivers across the Middle East and North Africa with over 300,000 safety kits, including hand sanitizers, wipes, and surface sprays. So in Saudi, similar to what we're doing in the rest of the world, we continue to explore new initiatives that are relevant to the pandemic and relevant to the recovery from pandemic. For instance, today vaccine distribution is top of mind, and we stand willing and ready to support if and when needed.
Well, that's incredibly impressive. And I have to say, you know, your Uber, a big global company, has the feel of a local, and your response and adaptation to the local environment and the challenges and the opportunities there are, again, quite impressive. Final question, Andrew, would love to hear your future, your outlook on the future of mobility and Uber's focus as well in the kingdom. What does that look like?
We want to get the kingdom moving again. We want to get the world moving again. So our focus is on helping governments and helping economies accelerate into the recovery. We're going to look to create as many strong, flexible earning opportunities for our drivers in the communities in which we operate. We really want to bring value to customers into this new post-pandemic normal, and we really want to bring additional earning opportunities for drivers. So we're exploring a number of different products which potentially we could launch in Saudi soon, such as, you know, additional delivery of goods, just for one example, which helps businesses serve their customers' needs. Equally important, we think safety into this recovery is critical, so we'll continue our focus on our safety technology advancement, focus on hygiene at this sort of in-between period as people get vaccinated. And we're going to continue to look at safety as a top priority for our business in the kingdom. And finally, and honestly, perhaps more importantly than ever into this economic recovery, flexible, easy access to good work is more important than ever. And, you know, the Saudi government's already recognized this through a ride-hailing subsidy program that exists. And we're going to continue to work with the government to raise the standard of independent work to ensure that flexibility and security are not mutually exclusive. So we're taking a long-term view of our future in the kingdom. We want to continue to grow the business and grow our impact on the economy and society, to continue to set the standards for the industry, and to make sure that all players are able to scale and grow on equal footing.
Well, Andrew, no pun intended, but it sounds like the road is paved going forward. And Uber does seem to have a very bright future in Saudi. You're bringing so much innovation and really global thought leadership to bear and really be part of the solution in Saudi Arabia going forward. So we love to hear about the collaboration that you have with the government. And just know, on behalf of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, we appreciate you, Andrew, for being with us today, and Uber's active participation with us on all things Saudi and Middle East.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate you having me.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Good evening, good morning, and good afternoon to everyone tuning in, and welcome to this In Conversation session on sustainability and the circular economy. My name is Jonathan Birdwell. I am Director of Public Policy and Thought Leadership for Europe, Middle East, and Africa at the Economist Intelligence Unit, and it is an honor to be moderating this session today and to present to you some of the findings of a new report we are launching with support from PepsiCo today on the topic of circular economy in Saudi Arabia. Now, the report is titled Boosting Circularity Across Saudi Arabia, and it's based on research undertaken by the EIU to look at some of the challenges and the opportunities of realizing a circular economy in the kingdom. So for the session today, I will highlight first just a few themes from our report, and then I'll chair a short discussion with my two very esteemed guests. First, Dr. Abdul Wahab Al Sadoun, Secretary General of the Gulf Petrochemical Association. Dr. Al Sadoun's career stretches over 3 decades in the GCC's petrochemical and energy sectors. And in 2020, Dr. Al Sadoun served as B20 Sherpa, responsible for operational management to the B20 Secretariat, including delivery and advocacy of policy recommendations. As well as my second guest, Mr. Eugene Williamson, Chief Executive Officer of PepsiCo for Africa, Middle East, and South Asia. Mr. Williamson joined PepsiCo in 1995 and has held a number of positions within the company since, and plays a key role in PepsiCo's sustainability initiatives, including on the reduction and use of plastic. So gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me today. And before I come to you with some questions, allow me just a few minutes to set out some context for our viewers.
So hopefully many of you tuning in today are already aware of the circular economy concept. It is a concept that has deep-rooted historical and philosophical origins, but its practical applications to modern economic systems and industrial processes has really gained momentum in recent years as the world confronts climate change and tries to shift away from an extractive linear economy. Now, many of us, I'm sure we all know, a linear economy, raw materials are extracted, processed, and turned into products, which are then discarded at the end of their lifetime. A circular economy, on the other hand, follows a 3R approach: reduce, reuse, and recycle. It seeks to design out waste externalities and extend product life cycles, keep resources in use through reuse and remanufacturing, and regenerate natural capital by using renewable inputs wherever possible. Now, there are clearly environmental benefits to moving to a circular economy model, but really the key takeaway from our research at the EIU and the focus on the discussion today is on the potential economic benefits to the wider economy, as well as opportunities for investment that this shift presents. Now, waste prevention and product redesign could save companies money, it could boost growth, and create new jobs. PwC forecasts that a circular economy model could generate up to $138 billion in economic benefits in the GCC over the course of the next decade. And just within the construction sector alone, estimates suggest that circular economy approaches could save $23 billion for GCC companies and governments over the next 10 years, including by reducing and reusing waste. Now, Saudi Arabia has already adopted some shifts towards circularity in recent years through the Vision 2030 strategy and the National Transformation Plan. However, in our report, we analyze how greater efforts to achieve circularity in 3 interconnected areas, municipal waste, food waste, and landfills, could offer high potential for investment. Now, according to the World Bank, the world produces over 2 billion tons of municipal waste annually, at least 1/3 of which is not disposed of in an environmentally safe manner. And solid waste per capita in the kingdom is especially high. It's significantly higher than the regional average and the global average. Now, one of the primary reasons for high rates of municipal waste in Saudi Arabia appears to be low recycling rates. According to one study, the country produces 50 million tons of recyclable materials each year, but recycles no more than 10% of them. So a focus on circular economy principles could give rise to a new recycling industry in the kingdom, which could create thousands of jobs. Now, in the report, we look at countries like Chile, Denmark, and China, which highlight that there are different paths for countries to obtain circularity. But in all of those examples, they seem to combine government strategy and investment, vision and the right incentives for business, raising public awareness on these issues, and technological innovations. And bringing these 4 elements together, and we think a circular economy can reap both environmental and economic dividends. Now, at the same time, it is important to recognize that a circular economy cannot be established overnight. It does require prioritization and a significant amount of sustained effort between government and businesses working together. There's a lot more detail in the report, including on priorities for Saudi Arabia and case studies from around the world. So I do urge you to visit our website at eiuperspectives.com to access the report. But with that, I'd love to turn now into the discussion with my guests in this session. And coming to you first, Dr. Al-Saud. So as Secretary General of the Gulf Petrochemicals Association, in your view, does the kingdom need to adopt a circular economy approach? And if so, why do you think that is important?
Well, thank you, Jonathan. I'm delighted to join in this panel my friend Eugene. And I'd like to thank the Ministry of Investment and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce for inviting me to join and share our perspective as a regional industry. Maybe to put things into perspective, I'd like to highlight that one of the essence that you had beautifully, alluded at of the circular economy and the sustainability is turning waste into value. And this had been demonstrated and practiced, 40 or 50 years back by the petrochemical industry by launching and developing the globally competitive petrochemical industry in Saudi Arabia and the rest of the GCC states. The essence then was to capture the value of the associated gas, which used to be flared, polluting the environment, as well as losing the value of a depleting resource. Since then, with the several options that was assessed, the petrochemical industry had proven to be the best option from environmental, economical, and social perspective. And the kingdom embarked of developing a globally competitive industry. Today, we represent close to 7% of the global petrochemical output by volume. Few of our partners in the early wave of the development of the petrochemical industry, some leading American companies, namely Exxon, Mobil, Celanese, Shell, Dow, and Chevron. And just to highlight that this partnership, in particular, the one between ExxonMobil and SABIC, is truly a shining example, since the two companies had developed successfully 2 joint ventures in Saudi, and they went ahead and currently they are developing the 3rd joint venture, developing a mega project in the Gulf Coast in Texas, which is scheduled to be commissioned in 2021. On your question on what's in it for Saudi Arabia, the circular economy, today the concept is fast evolving, and its benefits are growing rapidly, and few of those benefits are captured in the kingdom's Vision 2030. Maybe I address this from 3 dimensions in the interest of time. Firstly, being a global energy leader, Saudi Arabia had championed effective energy solution to address the emission challenge, and by developing the pragmatic concept of the circular carbon economy, which encompass the 4 R's, namely reduce, reuse, recycle, and remove, in order to restore the human-earth balance and harmonize the carbon cycle. The concept was championed by Saudi Arabia, by the Saudi Arabian G20 presidency, and endorsed by the G20 leaders in their summit last November. Another good example in Saudi Arabia, which is addressing the climate change and reducing the carbon emission, was developed back in 2015 by SABIC, building the world's largest carbon capturing plant in Jubail, capturing 500,000 ton of carbon dioxide and using it as a feedstock to manufacture other valuable products. To put things into perspective, that volume of carbon dioxide captured by this plant is equivalent to planting over 11 million trees, to reduce the same level of reduction in the carbon dioxide. Secondly, Saudi Arabia has the opportunity to be the world leader in the clean energy transition through the production of hydrogen, and this had been demonstrated by the pilot projects and the first shipment of blue ammonia last September. This project is co-developed by Saudi Aramco, SABIC, and the Japanese Institute for Energy Economics. On the same path, there had been an announcement also last year for developing the green hydrogen and green ammonia in NEOM. This is a joint project between the American company Air Products and the local Aqua Power, capital investment in the tune of $5 billion, and it is designed to produce 1.2 million ton per annum of green ammonia by 2025. Thirdly, and lastly, the circular economy is much more than waste management. That said, recycling is one of the key pillars of the carbon economy. And this is one area that requires urgent attention and investment. As you rightly said, the kingdom is not doing well in terms of recycling the solid municipality waste. But that said, realizing that there is a need for the government to step in, the PIF had established back in 2017, the Saudi Investment Recycling Company, which is trying to address this challenge. Currently, we, as you rightly said, less than 10% of the solid waste is recycled, and this is a lost opportunity. Here we're talking about $18.7 billion of lost opportunity, given that we have close to 45 million tons of waste generated every year. So the key success factor for the circular economy in Saudi Arabia, in our opinion, is a partnership across the entire value chain, as the concept has to be integrated from the product design all the way to the production process and the end user applications. A good example is True Circular portfolio launched by SABIC, which address this issue. Secondly, the partnership with the government. This is also critical for the success. I think without the support of the government, little can be accomplished in the future. So we need some subsidies, some incentives, for and public-private partnership to address this issue and successfully accomplish the benefits of the circular economy. Back to you, Jonathan.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dr. Al Saud. It's really useful to hear of all those initiatives. And I think, that you're absolutely right. The sort of, I think, key message is the lost opportunity that is currently there if we don't make this shift, and that there is economic opportunity here. Mr. Williamson, I'd like to come to you and maybe build on some of those things outlined by the doctor, and in particular focus on the role of the private sector in supporting circularity in the kingdom. And how does this fit with PepsiCo's larger sort of sustainability goals?
It's great. So thanks, Jonathan, and thanks, Dr. Al Saud. Thank you for your perspective, and let me add a couple of things from our side. So first of all, we believe at PepsiCo that there is a big opportunity and also responsibility for us as one of the leading food and beverage companies to play a role in how the world grows, manufactures, consumes, and disposes of the foods and beverages that the world consumes. Of course, within that context, the circular economy is one of the key concepts that we're also focused on. And Jonathan, you alluded to the three R's. We actually have a fourth R as well. So it's reduce, recycle, reuse, but we also look at reinventing. So is there opportunities for different business models where basically you don't use packaging or you use much less packaging material? Now, if you then look at the role of the private sector, and specifically the private sector within Saudi, I think there's a big opportunity for us actually to come together. But of course, as Dr. Al Saud already alluded, there's also a role for it today. If you look at some of the countries where recycling has been set up successfully over the past few decades, and my home country, which is not the US, but the Netherlands, is probably one of those examples where we started way back when I was a child with a recycling scheme. And today, the percentage of PET, as an example, that is being recycled in my home country is close to 97%. So that's a very high percentage if you benchmark that versus the 10% in Saudi. Now, I think in Saudi, and the good news is that we have actually a lot of capabilities. We have a fantastic petrochemical industry, as Dr. Al Saud referred to. So there's a lot of technical capability. You have great companies like SABIC. There's also, of course, already waste collection happening in the kingdom with companies like Wasco. So I think what needs to happen now is the creation of this ecosystem where you bring together large producers like ourselves together with waste collection companies, but also together with companies that actually can provide the recycling capability. And SABEC definitely is one of those. What also needs to happen is the creation of I would say, a supportive regulatory framework. And what I mean with that is that, for instance, rPET currently in Saudi is not being allowed to use in food production. So even if we were to set up a full recycling system, and even if we were to get the recycling rates up to, let's say, 30–40%, we wouldn't be able to use recycled PET to produce PET and with that reuse the material. So that is something that would have to change in the regulatory framework. And then the government also has a role to play in terms of facilitating the setup of that infrastructure. From our side, what we're doing as PepsiCo, as I said, we're working on the 4 Rs. So we're reducing the use of packaging material as much as possible. We are working in many parts across the globe to set up the right partnerships to drive recycling and then reuse the material. And I would say our business in Europe is probably one of the businesses where we're most advanced in terms of very aggressive targets in terms of the usage of rPET. But I'm very keen, I'm really keen to make similar commitments in the kingdom. But what needs to happen in the kingdom in order to be able to do that for me is the infrastructure, but also, as I said, the right regulatory framework that allows me and other manufacturers to use rPET for the production of food and beverages.
Thank you very much, Mr. Williamson. That's very interesting and useful in the points about infrastructure and regulatory framework. I'd like to add to that and come back to both of you with the same question around the investment front, and perhaps looking at incentives as well. I wonder if you could both speak, maybe Dr. Al Saud first, around how Saudi Arabia could incentivize circular economy. What kind of incentives need to be provided to businesses and to help drive this agenda forward?
Well, thank you once again, Jonathan. I fully subscribe to Eugene's emphasis on the need for the regulatory framework, which is, the first step in encouraging investment in these sectors. And alongside this requirement, I think it's critical also to address one of the issues, which is the lack of central policy that promote circularity. There are examples in regard to setting a timeline for a specific target. Take the European, for instance, who had set a target for zero landfill by the year 2030. This is unfortunately lacking, and we need to the government and the regulators need to address this. Secondly, in addition to the infrastructure that is needed, there is a need for revisiting the regulations and the standard that support the achievement of recycling target, which is linked to the first point I was alluding at. And here we need standard related to the post-consumer recycled content, which is lacking, unfortunately, especially in the food packaging, and Eugene had nicely alluded at this. So from our perspective, most importantly, we need a change of the irresponsible behavior in terms of the waste management, whether for individual or for businesses. That is really creating the problem. But we are optimistic that things are going to be changed with this launch of the new company, new vehicle that will lead the the recycling business in our kingdom.
Excellent, thank you, Mr. Williamson.
Yeah, I mean, building on the comments of Dr. Al Saud, I think the key incentive that the government can provide is make it economically attractive for recycling companies to set up the infrastructure And that means that ultimately these companies will need to have customers to which they can sell their material. And in order to do that, I come back to the point that I made earlier, the regulatory framework needs to incentivize companies like ours to be able to use recycled PET as just one example in its production processes. So that is a big incentive, or actually a simple step that the government could take. Then in terms of other incentives, I think what is required is a couple of things. You need to get the ecosystem going. So I think maybe subsidies or incentives for companies to start up waste collection and recycling is one other area. But then what is going to be very, very important is that collectively we work on driving a cultural change. And that's going to take time. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time, because as you referenced, the number of kilos of waste per capita that is being produced in Saudi Arabia, unfortunately, stacks up very high compared to its neighbors, and is about 2x what you see in the rest of the world. So we will need to drive behavioral change fairly quickly in the kingdom in order to move to a much cleaner and greener society as part also of the Vision 2030. And that will require investments in campaigns to, well, drive this behavioral change at large. And we can play a role there, but I think the government has to play a big role in that regard as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Williamson. So gentlemen, we actually are out of time here. We have a very short session today, but I'd like to thank you both very much for your comments and contributions and leadership on this topic. I think you've highlighted a number of things, important initiatives that you're both leading, but also some of the changes that need to happen within the country to help improve the business environment, provide companies the ability to come in and set up the infrastructure. And then, as you pointed to, the bigger challenge around cultural change, not just for companies, but also the public writ large. And of course, that will require sustained initiative and investment as well. So thank you both very much again. And I do hope that everyone tuning in will go and download the report, Boosting Circularity in Saudi Arabia, and read a bit more about some of the opportunities that this presents to the kingdom. So thank you both very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
How are you?
Great. How are you doing, Chris? I think they got the names reversed. Now we're good.
Okay.
Great. Hey, Chris.
Very good to see you, Ahmed. Thank you for doing this.
Sure. It's great to be here. Are we live?
I believe we are live. So thank you, Jonathan, for that rich discussion on the circular economy and the way that companies in the US and Saudi Arabia are working together to decrease plastic waste worldwide. I'd like to thank Eugene Williamson from PepsiCo, the chair of the Chamber's U.S. Saudi Business Program, and Dr. Abdul Wahab Al Sadoun from the Gulf Petrochemicals and Chemicals Association for offering their perspectives on this issue. Following this forum, The Economist will be launching a report on the circular economy in the kingdom. Stay tuned for that report, as we will share it in the coming days. Now, I'm happy to turn today's discussion on another key component of sustainability: carbon emissions and opportunities in the low carbon future. As it has been referenced repeatedly over the last couple of days, sustainability and decarbonization are major priorities in Saudi Arabia. The kingdom aims to generate 50% of its energy demand using renewable resources by 2030, and American companies will be key partners as the kingdom works towards achieving this commendable goal. Saudi Aramco, the world's largest oil company, has been very active in pursuit of this target and has developed and implemented many innovative initiatives and technologies that look to a low carbon future. Today, we have the Chief Technology Officer of Saudi Aramco, Mr. Ahmed Al-Khawaita, who will speak with me a bit more about what Aramco is doing to meet global energy needs in a sustainable way. Ahmed joined Saudi Aramco in 1983, where he held many roles, including Chief Engineer and Executive Director of Power Systems. He has a degree in Chemical Engineering from King Fahd University, a master's degree in Chemical Engineering from the University of California at Santa Barbara, and an MBA from MIT. So with that, Ahmed, thank you so much for being with us today. And my first question to you is, as the world's leading oil exporter, is the kingdom at a disadvantage in a carbon-constrained world? And as a related part to that, let me start with that, and then I have a follow-on too. But is the kingdom at an advantage in a carbon-constrained world?
So first of all, thank you, Krish. It's great to be here. And you know, in the first impression, it appears that a major oil exporting nation like Saudi Arabia should be at a disadvantage in a carbon-constrained world. What is paradoxical about this is that, in fact, as the world seeks to achieve even higher decarbonization targets, and we're seeing people moving toward net zero targets around the world, the kingdom is actually looking in a better position in many ways, because the biggest challenge going forward will be the use of energy sustainably. And so it is becoming a higher cost to use energy sustainably around the world, not in the kingdom, but around the world in many places where we are exporting energy. So at first look, you would think that then demand for energy might reduce, but in fact we see that there will continue to be demand for energy because there's economic growth. And so how will that energy be decarbonized? When we look at the options the world is looking at around to be able to reduce that carbon, in the what I would call the easy to decarbonize sectors, which is, for example, parts of the power sector and some parts of the energy mix, yes, renewables are extremely competitive, and therefore the challenge for hydrocarbons in those sectors, in the power sector and others, is great. But as we move to very hard to decarbonize sectors, what everyone is realizing is that there are very few ways, competitive ways, economically viable ways to decarbonize those sectors without energy carriers, energy dense carriers. And what a lot of countries have realized is that means basically hydrogen is really one of the few options to help decarbonize the world at the very hard to decarbonize sectors. And Saudi Arabia, in many ways, has the greatest advantage in those areas. Number one is we have already, of course, the lowest cost energy in the world in the form of lowest cost hydrocarbon energy in the world, in the form of oil, and that's acknowledged and known. But not only do we have that, but we also have incredible resources, renewable resources that allow us to avail decarbonized energy resources and even export those in the form of green hydrogen, as we heard about NEOM, or in the form of blue hydrogen, which we have been able to export recently in September when we set our first shipment of blue ammonia. So the opportunity of blue, which is a combination of hydrocarbons and carbon capture, is new to the world in a way because people don't recognize its value. But in fact, it offers a very competitive way of decarbonizing the hardest to decarbonize sectors. And exporting of blue hydrogen is a tremendous opportunity, and we've identified that. It's basically using our great hydrocarbon resources, which, by the way, because of our investment, our technology, are today the world's lowest carbon footprint hydrocarbons available in the market. Saudi Arabia emits the least amount of CO2 per barrel of oil produced among all major oil producers, 10 kilograms of CO2 per barrel. So we are starting with the lowest cost energy, couple that with the lowest cost carbon capture cost, and add to that the lowest cost renewable energy, and you've got an unbeatable combination, and especially for what I would call the hard to decarbonize energy sectors. And that's like steel, many of the heavy industry that was needed, in fact, petrochemicals, ammonia, many chemical sectors, many industrial sectors, which are needed for the new energy world that we're looking at. Much of it is based on what are durable goods, things like solar panels, windmills, all of the kind of technologies which require hard to decarbonize industry. So in many ways, the energy that was being used in the form of direct use as hydrocarbons is now being used in the form of low energy products. And so this is where there's an opportunity. Maybe that answers part of the question.
Right. No. Right. So then, related to that, Ahmed, then if that's the opportunity, and you make a very valid point that the hydrocarbon companies are really very well equipped to make this transition and facilitate it. So with that, where do you think, what are the implications in general and particularly for Saudi Aramco are there in terms of future investments when it comes to this new energy value chain?
So, as you know, we are very much invested, of course, in hydrocarbons. And we believe, of course, that oil will be with us for a long time to come. And that's understood and accepted by most observers and forecasters of the energy system. There is going to be a need for oil long into the 21st century, because of some very hard to decarbonize sectors like aviation, marine, and other areas of transport, as well as, of course, the need that continues for petrochemicals. So petrochemicals today, for example, is about 17% of the use of the barrel of oil. But by 2050, it will be up to 40%. So oil is needed forever, really, to produce the large-scale petrochemicals, which are the basis and foundation of our new world, our world of in our energy world, in our industrial world. So I think that we're going to be here, we're going to be needing our hydrocarbon production, our low-cost, very competitive hydrocarbon production, for a long time to come. But it's best to have which barrel is going to be the most competitive in 2050. It's going to be the one which has the least associated emissions. And so not only do we have the lowest cost, but also the lowest emissions, which means it will be the most competitive barrel that will be still produced. So if there's less oil produced in 2050 or 2060, it is most likely to be produced by us in Saudi Arabia because we have the lowest emissions today, naturally, as well as from the technology we applied, and the scale, as well as the lowest cost of carbon capture from the associated emissions. So that's an argument that we'll be doing a lot of oil for a long time to come. Above and beyond the oil, we have the ability to decarbonize our energy products, like blue ammonia, like blue hydrogen, and other products like, for example, e-fuels, which will allow, for example, the export of fuels with neutral carbon, zero carbon footprint over their life cycle. So this low energy advantage can be translated to a low carbon energy advantage through technology and through new business models. Such as, for example, direct air capture, carbon capture and sequestration. All of these technologies we are developing as we speak. We have a pilot, for example, for carbon capture and utilization and enhanced oil recovery since 2015, sequestering around 800,000 tons of CO2 per year. So this is the kind of experience and technology we're applying, and we're expanding over the years, which will allow us to lower our carbon footprint with production, but also allow us to produce lower carbon products. So this is where I think Aramco is going to be producing, diversifying our product mix into low carbon products, in addition to our low emissions hydrocarbon products, but also low carbon use products. In other words, scope 3, low carbon emissions with their use, such as petrochemicals, for example. Because they're used as material, they're not burned, that use of the barrel will give a low carbon product, a low carbon scope 3. But also things like blue ammonia, which when you do burn it, or blue hydrogen, when you do burn it, it doesn't give off anything but water, no CO2. So that's how we can diversify our energy mix, our export product mix, and there achieve very low long-term emissions.
Fascinating. If I may drill into one aspect of something you just mentioned, Ahmed, could you elaborate further on the kingdom's competitiveness in blue and green hydrogen supply to us, and maybe just also why you think the kingdom will be competitive given broader trends of potential use of blue and green hydrogen supply?
So as you know, many observers have seen that there's going to be huge growth in the use of hydrogen because of its basically carbon footprint, zero carbon footprint in its use. And many have forecast that, in fact, the most competitive source of that initially at scale will be hydrocarbon sources. So, you know, today, 75% of all hydrogen produced in the world is produced from oil and gas. It's called gray hydrogen because in that production we emit, you know, the process emits CO2. Now, by coupling that with carbon capture at an additional cost, we're able to eliminate the emissions associated with that hydrogen, and that's the blue hydrogen. So the scale of the blue hydrogen, because of its scale, because of its low-cost energy source in the form of natural gas in many cases, blue hydrogen today is very competitive. It's in the range of, with carbon capture, about $1.4 per kilogram of hydrogen produced to up to $1.8 per kilogram, depending on the price of the natural gas and the cost of the carbon capture. Now, if you compare that to the green hydrogen available today, the lowest probably green hydrogen available in the world is for example, in Saudi Arabia, is probably in the range of $2.5 per kilogram. And that's because the solar energy, of course, is the lowest in the world. So we're able to achieve the lowest cost renewable energy and therefore the lowest cost hydrogen from renewable energy. At the higher levels, we're talking about solar or renewable energy sources around the world. It probably ranges from $6 to $8 in Europe and North America, probably a little cheaper, depending on the cost of the renewable resources. So you end up between, for renewable hydrogen, green hydrogen, as they say, $2.5 to $8 per kilogram. For blue hydrogen, between $1.4 to $1.8 a kilogram, depending on the price of natural gas. So of course, the projections are that the green hydrogen will fall very fast due to the cost of the technology. The deployment will reduce that cost. And we're expecting price parity or cost parity, let's say, between green hydrogen and blue hydrogen. Most of the experts see this around post-2030, that we'll see at least an overlap between the higher costs of blue hydrogen and the lower costs of green hydrogen, and probably price parity in the 2040 timeframe between most green hydrogen and most blue hydrogen. So blue hydrogen, though, remains competitive. It remains competitive through to 2050 in most estimates, and that's because, as I said, technology also improves the cost of carbon capture, the cost of production of natural gas. All of that improves over time as well, and the conversion to blue. So we're seeing probably about 50% of the world's need in hydrogen will come from low carbon blue hydrogen and about 50% from green hydrogen. And Saudi Arabia is well placed to provide both.
Oh, that's fascinating. And, you know, the theme of this overall conference is looking at the world and the global economy and the Saudi-US partnership post-COVID. Clearly, new forms of energy sustainability are at top of the global agenda. And this has been a fascinating conversation. I'm told we've run out of time, but we will revisit this because it is timely, it is important, and it is very, very much a part of the discussion as we look to the future. So to our audience, a big thanks to Ahmed Al-Kuwaita, the Chief Technology Officer of Saudi Aramco. Ahmed, thank you for your time today. We look forward to continuing this conversation.
Thank you, Krish. It was great talking to you.
We are proud to be a part of Johnson & Johnson, the world's largest and most broadly based healthcare company. With our credo as our guide, we always put the well-being of the people we serve first. For nearly a century, Janssen has fearlessly confronted the world's most devastating and complex diseases to create a future where they are a thing of the past. Having invested more than $8.8 billion in pharmaceutical R&D in 2019, today we are channeling our experience into supporting Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030.
Together with our public partners in Saudi Arabia, we aim to support the creation of a highly capable local industry. Through Janssen's partnerships with Tobacco and SaudiVax, we are creating a pipeline of knowledge-driven human capital, capable of increasing manufacturing capabilities to cultivate a self-sufficient pharma and biologics sector.
We are striving to elevate healthcare and research capabilities in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Through our strategic partnerships with King Abdullah University of Science Technology, KAUST, we are researching innovative and preventive treatment strategies for tropical neglected diseases and staying one step ahead of future pandemics.
We aim to deliver improved outcomes, enhancing the patient experience and providing value-based healthcare. Through an innovative patient access program, enhancing the end-to-end patient experience, improving the digital reach for patients, raising awareness and education, and advancing clinical outcomes through partnerships with the medical community.
With our partners in Saudi Arabia, we are aiming to increase private sector participation and grow opportunities for Saudi nationals by driving a local talent development agenda and building a pipeline of future leaders.
By focusing on the areas of medicine where we can make the biggest difference, our pipeline is rich and ready with transformational science to help Saudi achieve its Vision 2030 healthcare goals. It's this approach that made Johnson & Johnson the best place to work in Saudi Arabia in 2020. Reflecting our unique approach to innovation, we are focusing our efforts where we have the greatest opportunity to save and improve lives, help build capabilities, and forge a self-reliant, localized healthcare industry in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
We could not have asked for a better introduction to our next session on healthcare innovation and biotech, supporting economic recovery and improving the quality of life. As you just saw, the private sector biopharmaceutical innovators are investing billions every year across many different companies, many different disease areas, in building a robust pipeline to be ready to meet healthcare challenges for today and for the future. We've got an all-star panel here with us over the next 30 minutes to discuss some important aspects of that overall ecosystem. I'm joined by Professor Pierre Magistretti, who's the director of the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology Smart Health Initiative. Welcome, Professor. We have Patrick Vanderloo, who's the president, Africa and the Middle East at Pfizer. Welcome. Damian Halloran is the vice president, infectious diseases for emerging markets at Abbott. And from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, we have Dr. Sarah Al-Thari, who is the business development advisor to the Ministry of Investment. Welcome, Sarah. It's really an honor to be with you. I'm Patrick Kilbride. I'm the Senior Vice President for the Global Innovation Policy Center at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And let's jump right in. Damien, I'd like to start with you. You know, given Abbott's global footprint, you sort of see it all. I wonder if you could talk to us about some of the things that we're seeing in terms of best practices and protocols for economic recovery. What is it that political leaders should be focused on today?
Sure. Well, thank you, Patrick. First of all, it's a privilege to be here. and to represent Abbott. We have a proud history of over 60 years in Saudi. Lots of over 300 people employed in the country, and have local manufacturing TPM activities in our established pharmaceutical and nutrition business. So we're very committed to the Saudi Arabia Vision 2030, and we look forward to exploring innovations in the future. But to your question, which I think is very pertinent in today's world, what are the methods to get to economic recovery and get there safely? So I think last year, I think we could all say, has been a year like no other. There have been many phases of the pandemic. There have been twists and turns. We've had outbreaks, lockdowns, spiking case rates, lots of uncertainty. And the societal and economic impact is pretty significant. His Excellency commented yesterday on the economic impact, but I think societal impact is important as well on people. So we've spent a lot of time considering what is the roadmap to getting back to societal norms. Having people interact again, enjoying mass gatherings, travel, workplace, and doing this safely, and I think most importantly with peace of mind, that they feel safe again. So we see surveillance and vaccinations as critical to reopening economies and building trust. We're seeing that trend in Europe in particular, where they've married both the vaccination rollout with a mass country scale surveillance, where they continue to look to make sure that the virus is not spreading. Because during rollout of vaccination, people who get vaccinated can still transmit the virus to others. So when I look at it within Abbott, when we started on the journey 12 months ago, we've developed 12 different COVID tests across the full portfolio, starting with PCR, which we proudly represent in the Kingdom in our PCR testing, but also molecular, antibody testing, and now antigen testing. And I do want to dwell on antigen testing, because we see antigen testing as the mass screening tool because of its performance and its ability to detect people who are infectious. And we link that with also the very important part of deploying economic recovery is ensuring we comply with government policies and procedures in relation to reporting and monitoring and credentializing who is free of the virus. So that digitalization, which we can talk to later, is an important aspect as well. So to give you some specific examples, so we look at reopening economies in four segments. The first one, and I think foundational for all of us, is education. So in schools and universities, how do you bring the students back, all the way from kindergarten through to higher education? So we have a number of examples. I'll give you one in the U.S. where most of the universities have now set up bi-weekly, either weekly or bi-weekly, depending on the state, screening of their students to enable safe interaction again. And it has proven to really help that case rate risk in a student population that tend to, societally gather a lot. We also, just across the bridge in Bahrain, have done a lot of work, and they've implemented very significant protocols and screening of all their school children, which is a very important aspect. And we're seeing this globally. We're seeing this trend globally because keeping our students and our teachers safe is fundamental to economic recovery, getting them back into the school environment. The second one then would be industry. So serial testing in the workplace, getting people back to the work environment. For office-based staff, most people have been remote for over a year. In manufacturing industry, they have been back. But how do you create it safe and make sure you don't have infection control spread? In Abbott, we've been serial testing. I get tested twice a week for the past 8 months when I'm in the office, and we rotate in the office. We have examples in Brazil in the food industry, meat industry, mining in Canada. It has become a significant part of reopening for major industries to do it safely for their people working with occupational health. The third section would be travel and border crossing. Air travel, tourism, all of the aspects of people being able to cross borders again. We've been working with IATA actively on a global travel pass arrangement, electronic travel pass. And specifically, we've been working with probably about 16 different airlines to help come up with the right framework and the access for passengers to be able to be tested prior to boarding, and that the test they do is approved in the country in which they arrive. And then lastly, the one I would cover is the fourth sector we look at is mass gatherings and events. So be it conferences or congresses, sporting events, hotels, you know, a couple of examples in sporting events just to share with you kind of what's happening in the world. 2 weeks ago, we did a screening activity for the Singapore tennis ATP tournament. So there was testing daily of all the athletes. And then for the finals, semifinals and finals, they allowed people into the stadium for the first time, but they did it based on screening before they entered the stadium in the 15-minute screening test. So I suppose, you know, to close, if we look at it from a Saudi Arabia viewpoint, we're very excited to partner to help to enable economic recovery for your industry. But also the one that comes to mind for me is the upcoming Hajj, Umrah pilgrimages in Medina El Manura. You know, very important for Saudi and creating an environment where people can feel safe and attend these very important religious festivals. Policies and guidelines will be important with the government and understanding workflows that enable this opening safely. So I suppose two final comments to close. You know, we also have antibody testing, and our colleague from Pfizer will be talking shortly on the criticality of vaccinations and the efficacy and resistance of the vaccination. So we have antibody testing in our core labs, for example. And I think connected health is something we've learned a lot about, and digitalization in enabling decentralized testing and a good standard of care. And in closing, I would say that the thing that I would reflect on, and we reflect on a lot, is if we could wind the clock back 12 months, what would we do differently as a world, as a society? So what is the lesson learned, pandemic preparedness for the future? You know, do we need tests, vaccines, health deployment mechanisms, digital frameworks that will have a mechanism to have us better prepared for the future? So with Saudi Arabia and the kingdom, we know that you can show the way in the region and be a beacon of light to help reverse the impact of this pandemic. Thanks, Patrick.
Well, thanks, Damien. You've not only given us a good roadmap for recovery and reopening, but actually teed up the next question for Patrick from Pfizer, which is really about readiness and resilience. Clearly, Pfizer was ready when this pandemic struck and really has delivered. But more broadly, what can you say about the global healthcare system and what all of us need to do to be ready to respond more effectively to this crisis and the next?
Thanks, Patrick. Nice to see you again. And thank you, U.S. Chamber and the Ministry of Investment. It's an honor to speak on this panel with such distinguished representatives. As Damien mentioned as well for his organization, we have a significant local presence in Saudi Arabia, where we've been present for over 60 years with a workforce of over 460 employees. And referring back just briefly to the ESG discussion on this webcast this morning, which I found very interesting, we now roughly have half our workforce are Saudi nationals. And of these, currently 30% are female at all levels of the organization. And by the end of this year, that will be 44%, which is an up from 7% 3 years ago. Just wanted to refer back to that ESG discussion that was there this morning. Now, yeah, obviously I cannot introduce Pfizer today and not talk about our joint COVID-19 efforts. Again, I just want to applaud the leadership and the immense effort and success of the Saudi government, similar as what Damien did in managing the pandemic itself. They took such swift action. To put it in perspective, Saudi was the 4th country in the world to launch a vaccination campaign last December, after the U.S, Canada, and I believe the U.K. And so, as announced in the media, we are pleased to be one of the companies supporting the government in provision of a COVID-19 vaccine. but not only for Saudi Arabia. Pfizer stands in solidarity with all those affected by the pandemic around the world. And like Madam Ambassador mentioned in her opening comments earlier today, we're all in this together, and we've been working closely with governments as well as NGOs around the world since the earliest days of the pandemic, which we continue to do so. Now, when it comes to resilient health economies, and a very fascinating answer by Damien with regards to testing, that's now more critical than ever. I think the pandemic highlighted the interconnectedness of economies and healthy populations, and as a result, there is substantial focus by governments around the world to first create policies to facilitate access to therapies and vaccines, and second, to attract investment to strengthen its health sector to be ready. And to do both, governments should be focusing on creating an enabling environment for the ecosystem of innovation. And the Kingdom really has a strong health sector and a foundation to build upon to increase its attractiveness for investment and strengthening that ecosystem. There are a lot of elements and criteria that all countries should consider, but there are two that I'll limit my answer to today and put them a little bit in the context of the pandemic and the readiness that you refer to, Patrick. First one is intellectual property. And the protection of IP is a critical component of innovation. And it's one of the main reasons why we have vaccines today to tackle COVID-19. It enabled us to collaborate with BioNTech, our partner in the development of the vaccine, but also with governments and academic institutions, knowing that our IP will be upheld, protecting our, and you refer to it, Patrick, billions of dollars of investment in this field, but also protecting the governments and the public at large against unapproved products reaching their population. So strengthening and improving the IP system and aligning with international standards is element number one. The second is related to market and commercial incentives. These incentives can range from general R&D to specific policies that are aimed at the life sciences sector. And you've seen in the past localization requirements, pricing and reimbursement policies for medicines. And these policies have a profound impact, both positive and negative, on where companies invest. And I think as a lesson learned the pandemic forward, if you look at where the real value resides, governments should not only focus on brick and mortar manufacturing facilities, but rather really on high level knowledge intensive investments, such as innovative clinical trials, novel scientific partnerships, and technology transfers. That will not only create a sustained attractive market for investment in healthcare, but also help markets to be better prepared in dealing with emerging health situations. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, Patrick. You both mentioned diagnostics, and it strikes me, related to your comments on intellectual property, one of the remaining areas of weakness that we see in the United States policy environment is some restrictiveness on patent eligibility for inventions, including diagnostics, and one can't help but think that limits our readiness to respond. So as we look at some of the conditions for being prepared for this and the next pandemic, we hope that governments will take a broad approach to patent eligibility. You also talked about an ecosystem, and I want to turn now to Professor Magistretti. One of the things I think we've learned in this pandemic is that innovation is not monolithic. We've had, a closer view than ever, more public interest than ever in seeing how the process of innovation really works. And we see that it's not one company, it's not one government. It's actually, a complex ecosystem. Tell us about the role of academic researchers in that ecosystem.
Yes, indeed. I mean, as a mission of universities and academic research, of course, basic research is very important, but and in particular for us, I should say, the mission is also to translate basic research observations into innovation that can be contributing to the well-being of the population and also to economic development. And indeed, I can give many examples, but because of the topic today, I would like to stress one related to the COVID pandemic. In fact, within a few weeks, literally 2 to 3 weeks of the beginning of the pandemic, or let's say the lockdown, we were able to gather a group of scientists in KAUST who applied their basic research to developing either diagnostics or also monitoring viral mutations using computational approaches, or even using artificial intelligence to predict and provide diagnostics based on CT scans from lungs in patients with COVID. So within the reaction was extremely rapid, and it shows that basic research actually is the source of innovation, and within rapidly, for example, a one-step PCR test was developed by one of our scientists, which is now the kit has been approved by the Saudi FDA. It's very sensitive and specific. We have also developed using the sensor technologies that were developed for other applications, of course, but could be applied very rapidly to point of care detection. Computational approaches, as I mentioned earlier, can be used to monitor the epidemiology of the viral mutations, potentially even maybe predict the mutations and help in developing appropriate vaccines, so that this messenger RNA technology can allow a very agile reactivity. I mentioned also artificial intelligence and diagnostics. So this is just one of the examples where I think academic research, even if very much rooted into basic research and basic principles, can, with the right attitude, result quite rapidly in applications that are useful for the community. Now, the question is, of course, creating the right ecosystem for this. And it is clear that in KAUST, and that's part of the Smart Health Initiative, which I have the privilege of directing and under the leadership of President Tony Chan, wants to contribute to not only to promote research and application, like I just gave an example a moment ago, but in particular by collaborating with leading medical centers in the kingdom, and there are many, and we have established now common grants and joint projects. Also education by developing MD, PhD programs and also clinician scientists, in other words, to bridge the two worlds of basic biomedically relevant research and clinical. And as I mentioned, also economic development. And for this, we really are very much eager to enter in collaboration with the biotechnology companies, by pharma, because that's where the bridging this gap can be operated in the best way. I mean, science, and we have proven it with this early reaction to the pandemic, can rather rapidly reach practical applications. But of course, on the long term, an ecosystem that involves also corporate partners and opens up the vision and the potential is key. And KAUST is ready for this, and this is part of course, Vision 2030. So I think giving these practical example, but also projecting into the future, and really building an ecosystem that is the next to leading academic centers, research centers, is really a must to to provide, again, support and therapies and diagnostics for the population, and at the same time foster economic development and innovation. So, this is my perspective, and I think that's shared by many many colleagues in KAUST and abroad, of the importance of this joint collaboration between the private sector and academic research.
Thank you, Professor. I think you really talked about a lot of very important topics. And if there was a word of the year in 2020, I think it should have been collaboration, because that's been so important to the rapid delivery of pandemic solutions. And if I could propose a word of the year for 2021, it would be translation. Now, you talked about the importance of the role of translating from basic research to practical clinical applications. And we see that happening throughout the innovation ecosystem, right? With handoffs, technology transfers taking place from one stakeholder to another. So I just think that's so important. And on that point of business development, I want to, of course, turn to Dr. Al-Falih to talk about the kingdom's prioritization of a vital role for Saudi Arabia in the biotech innovation ecosystem. And Dr. Al-Falih, you've talked about some pillars of that effort.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Patrick. First of all, I'm really honored and delighted to be with you today and to be speaking alongside my esteemed colleagues and fellow panelists. I think to set the stage, I just want to highlight that over the past year, we've witnessed medical biotechnology and biopharmaceutical innovation really take center stage as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. And we've seen the pandemic not only transform and accelerate the technology landscape, as evidenced by breakthroughs such as mRNA vaccines, but it has also inspired a heightened sense of urgency and priority towards the strategic development of the biomedical science sector, both globally and nationally. And I think we have a collective responsibility to be contributing to diagnostic and therapeutic breakthroughs and ensuring their scalability, distribution, and access through really comprehensive and competitive global biomedical supply chains. And for the kingdom specifically, I think we have a responsibility to enable efficient health solutions to broader populations, given our geostrategic location, the size of our economy, both globally and regionally, to ensure the safety of tens of millions of pilgrims to the holy city each year. And for this reason and many others, indeed it is Saudi Arabia's vision to develop itself as a global healthcare and life sciences hub, where companies will locate their research, their development, their production, and even their headquarter activities across the entire biomedical value chain, which we, from a business development perspective at the Ministry of Investment, characterize as being comprised of, as you mentioned, Patrick, three main pillars, which are R&D, manufacturing and distribution, and ultimately clinical care. And I think on the research and development side, we really aim to elevate and invigorate scientific research activities from basic science and early drug discovery and preclinical research in animals, all the way down to clinical trials in humans, and to really capitalize on our unique ethnic composition, our unique genomic architecture, most importantly, and to really invest in building biomedical research clusters and research and technology parks across the country. On the manufacturing front, we aspire to boost local capabilities for self-sufficiency and to achieve economies of scale in biotechnology, and to really position the kingdom as a major regional export-driven hub, considering the fact that we are nearly 40% of the MENA pharma market. And on the clinical care side, finally, we aim to enable the delivery of really high quality, efficient, and innovative healthcare solutions and services, and attract investments that are primarily driven by unmet clinical needs in our population and national health priorities. priorities. I think to achieve these objectives and really build end-to-end capabilities in the sector, we at MISA are really investing in the development of a robust infrastructure for the biomedical ecosystem in the kingdom. And we recognize that this infrastructure includes and requires healthy multi-sectorial partnerships. We talked about academia and the private sector, private-public partnerships. Of course, requires favorable policies and regulations. Our colleagues mentioned intellectual property, clinical trials, and these are all things that we are working on developing. This also requires competitive sector-specific incentives, talent and expertise, and of course, finally, sustained modes of financing. And we mentioned ecosystem building and the importance of policies and regulations to develop the ecosystem. And while we are, of course, very focused on investment attraction and bringing in FDI and DDI for thriving economic growth in the kingdom, we are also very much in the business of ecosystem building and ensuring that the right building blocks are there in terms of legislation, regulation, and policies to enable and empower all of our biotech ecosystem players and stakeholders.
Thank you so much, Dr. Al-Falih. I love that this strategy that you outlined recognizes that R&D is not sort of an all or nothing monolithic process, but there are multiple points of entry. A very astute strategy. We've got about 10 minutes left, maybe a little bit less. So I'd like to go right into sort of final thoughts with the panelists. And Damien, you talked about the importance of digitalization and really not going back to the pre-pandemic normal, but sort of taking a new approach to technology. And tell us a little bit more about what you're seeing.
Yeah, so I think it's a very interesting question and area to explore because, if we think about what happened over the last year, connected health and people not being able to get into healthcare settings, and we're seeing a lot more remote access, people accessing remotely. So if you think about it, it accelerated the acceptance of point of care testing, for example, in our industry, probably by 5 years. I think the marriage of technology and science is becoming more and more important. There are many companies out there now looking at how to have more self-testing capabilities, for example, how to monitor your own heartbeat and so on. We have our own Libre product in Abbott, which allows sports people to monitor their glucose levels, their energy levels, to be able to keep better topped up with the proper nutrition. So there's lots of examples, I think, of how connected health and digitalization is going to play a key role. We recently, well, not recently because of travel restrictions, but about a year ago, we had a very interesting discussion in Brazil with the triangulation of a physician with a testing capability and the patient, and that triangulation. How can that happen electronically in the future and digitally? And then lastly, my last comment I would make is one of the challenges in a number of our markets, in emerging markets, is the management of data and patient record keeping. So I do think digitalization and the ability for patient record keeping and follow-up and referrals is an area that digitalization will help to enable as well. So you're creating that hub and spoke type approach where you've limited access to qualified, maybe physician level, that nurse practitioner or indeed health community worker can do the test and diagnostic, and if they need help, they can access a physician like a teledoc type arrangement, and then aid the treatment and ultimately test to treat to outcome. What we're all looking to do is to build a better standard of care and better health outcomes.
Terrific. And I want to remind our audience, if you want to get involved in the conversation on social media here, please tag us all at hashtag USKSAInvest. Patrick, I think that takes us as a good segue to talk about clinical trials and sort of the central role that they play in drug development in general, but especially been very much in the public eye in the pandemic. Where are we headed?
Traditionally, Patrick, development of a vaccine is a multi-year process. Literally, Damien was talking about a year ago. 1 year ago, we didn't even have the plan for this vaccine. We started March of last year, and within 9 months, we not only developed a vaccine, complete a clinical trial, but we also had to build up a manufacturing and logistics process from the ground up. A massive undertaking. Very successful, but also, we're not ignorant to the fact that there's a lot of skepticism in society with regards to the use of vaccines either. And I think the basis for a lot of the trust that we are trying to generate and that we did try to generate is the relative participation of populations in the clinical trial design for the vaccine. When you look at the US specifics, we made sure that there was an equal representation, at least, of African American versus Caucasian, but also a very large proportion of Asian patients, and in the African Middle East region, a large proportion of patients from South Africa, for example. And then transparency with regards to the data outcomes is another element. So you have the relative participation, you have the transparency of the data outcomes, but I think also then prospectively looking at population impact, including very relevant to the kingdom, discussions ongoing with the government here on effectiveness of the vaccine in a population with the largest mass gathering on Earth, basically. And I think the speed with which we started working, the speed with which we've had these interactions with government, I don't think there's a path back. A lot of governments moved from paper-based submissions to digital submissions basically overnight. And in these collaborations, the doors have now opened, and I think it's on us to make sure that we continue to keep these doors open in the public-private partnership discussions. And in that sense, I'm also very encouraged by the comments from Dr. Al-Tari and also the leading role that Saudi can play in the region. And if I may make one comment relevant to this situation, I think it's critical that the kingdom continue to work with companies, multilateral organizations, other companies, as the world emerges from this pandemic. And if I can emphasize one thing there, I've seen our supply chain map for the COVID vaccine, and you can imagine it's extremely complicated. And it's critical that governments understand that these medicine supply chains are global, and that we avoid trade restrictions that prevent the movement of input, supplies, and therapies around the globe. And I think you know what I'm referring to when I talk about it in the context of the vaccine, Patrick.
Very, very important point. Thank you, Patrick. And your point about clinical trials really brings home that the public is part of this ecosystem for innovation through their participation in clinical trials, and that of many diverse communities. In the couple minutes we have left, I want to go first to Professor Magistrati and then to Dr. Al-Tari for the last word. Professor, any last thoughts about the health of this ecosystem and how we promote it?
What? Sorry, I didn't.
Speak to us about the health of the ecosystem that you work in and how we make the most of it.
Yes, I think a very important component in innovation, I mentioned this important collaboration between the private sector, large pharma or biotech, and academic research. But I think in terms of ecosystem, there is another dimension which is quite important, and that's promoting the translation, but not so much in the ways we biomedical researchers use it, translation from bench to bedside, but translation from bench to innovation. In other words, startups and spin-offs from academic research. And for this, the ecosystem also involves the existence and availability of venture capital that can take risks and promote this translation. And I think this is something that is absolutely central. I think elements are here at hand, and and working with in general with the kingdom ecosystem, and also bringing external VCs to become interested in innovation in the kingdom is definitely a way to go. So this part of the ecosystem should not be underestimated. It's a longer term. It takes more time because moving from bench to innovation, probably particularly in biopharma, takes time. But it's very important to take the lead from the discovery to the application and invest for this to happen.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Professor. And Dr. Al-Thari, you get the last word. So,
thank you, Patrick. I just want to close on this note and say that I'm happy to share that we at the Ministry of Investment have actually already built several robust policy alliances around some of the fundamental gaps and pain points that we've identified in our local biomedical ecosystem. And the aim of these alliances is to really raise concrete and actionable policy recommendations with clear legislative and bureaucratic frameworks for implementation that will help us unlock high-value segments of the biomedical value chain. And we're doing this in conjunction with biopharma industry partners, with the pharma group and others, and of course in close partnership with all of our key local ecosystem stakeholders. The efforts that I'm referring to, or the alliances that we've built, are around clinical trials, and we've built something called the Clinical Trials Coalition to address fragmentation in the ecosystem and come up with smart policy solutions to render our clinical trials landscape more globally competitive. We've built a similar alliance around intellectual property legislation, enforcement, and protection, as well as awareness. And we have built a third alliance around national data governance, legislation, and standards, primarily data policies to optimize for personalized medicine and value-based healthcare solutions. And the last thing I'll say, Patrick, is that it is our objective at MISA to move at the pace of innovation and identify strategic future-oriented opportunities for the kingdom. And as we continually reassess our value creation architecture, we'll continue to identify opportunities to enhance science and tech in the kingdom that are driven by our inherent competitive advantage, but also by unmet clinical needs, public health priorities, innovation, and national health security. And thank you very much.
Terrific. Good. Thank you. And best of luck with these critically important efforts. Really well done. So unfortunately, we're out of time. I want to thank the expert panelists who joined us and remind the audience that you can continue the conversation online at #USKSA Invest. And I'll leave you with a shameless plug. One of the key policy elements you heard about was intellectual property. And today, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has released the 9th edition of its International IP Index, Recovery Through Ingenuity. You can find it on uschamber.com. So with that, thank you, everyone. Let's keep going. Let's fight this pandemic. And I look forward to seeing you all in person next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick, and all your distinguished panelists for that enlightening discussion on healthcare. So timely. Thank you all also to all our speakers and panelists today, including Her Royal Highness Princess Reema, the Saudi ambassador to the US. It has been our honor to host all of you over this two-day forum. We understand we have consistently had over 1,200 people joining it. We thank you for your time and your insights. Just to recap today, our second day, we kicked off with H.R.H, the chairman of a U.S. Saudi business program at the U.S. Chamber and president and GM for Middle East, North Africa, and Pakistan for PepsiCo. We then had keynote remarks from Her Royal Highness Princess Reema. Then we had a panel discussion on economic diversification and Vision 2030 and fueling investment opportunities in the kingdom and with the American companies. We then had a conversation with Uber on shaping the future of mobility. Then there was a conversation with several panelists on the circular economy. And then we segued to the low carbon future, talking to the CTO of Aramco, Saudi Aramco. and then concluded with our most recent panel on healthcare, innovation, and biotech, supporting economic recovery and improving the quality of life in the post-COVID era. After this forum, the U.S. Chamber and the Saudi Ministry of Investment will look to host a series of sector-specific webinars in the coming months, as we did last year. There are a lot of exciting new developments across the economy in the kingdom, here in the United States, and this series will look to further explore the opportunities bringing American and Saudi companies together. As many of you know, the Chamber is very active across a range of policy issues, and this upcoming webinar series will provide a platform for you to engage with us to continue our important work and discussions. So do stay tuned. Before closing the forum, I would like once again to thank the key sponsors of today's events: Boeing, Johnson & Johnson, Chevron, and Venture Global LNG. Thank you for making this forum possible. Thank you also to the chair of the Chamber's U.S. Saudi Business Program, PepsiCo, who we appreciated hearing from today. And once again, thank you to you all for joining us. We look forward to a continued engagement on all of the important issues discussed. Thank you, and we are now adjourned.